Greetings, it is I, Countess Naravan Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. Today, we're continuing our spookiest of seasons of Spookytober with an interesting country on our Golarion Gazetteer that is directly linked with the undead Geb. But we're not just going to talk about the country of Geb today, we will talk about the infamous, incredibly powerful, and very dangerous Necromancer Geb, too. It's not like they're not interchangeable and they could be separated, but they are intrinsically entwined together, Geb and Geb. So I think that's the best way to kind of handle talking about that. But as usual, I will be using a number of books to talk about, so we'll talk about those books. While I do shout out, honestly, the Pathfinder of the QBS is a great source for these things and basic information. We'll kind of dive into what the books that we will be accessing have a little bit more. So, to start out with, the books I can shout out are a couple of them here, which combine information on Geb and Geb. The Inner Sea World Guide is a pretty good book to check out. I recommend checking out some information on Geb there. Of course, Campfire Sightings. These are two older books, but there is actually a bunch of information that's provided in the newer books because, well, with one of the adventure paths, some stuff happens with Geb. We'll talk about that. So, the thing about the Lost Omens, the second edition books that do a lot of information, which we have the Lost Omens Legends, talking about that, which kind of dives into some of the stuff. Well, you know, it handles a lot of the things that happen in the adventure paths and the aftermath of them. And of course, Lost Omens World Guide. There is the country symbol of Geb. Let's talk about Geb. We'll talk about its history. We'll talk a little bit about the basics of the country. So, Mekatar is its capital, ruled by Geb. It's an undead dictatorship. It's lawful evil. That's an important thing to note about it. It is lawful evil. And, yeah. So, it was actually formed during the Age of Destiny by Geb. It's known for land of undeads, with plantations filled with zombie laborers, kind of sticking in the mind. But there's a lot more deepness to Geb the country. I'll kind of try to say Geb the country, Geb the person. I'll try to separate them out. And we will dive into Geb the person when we talk about the rulership of the country. But for now, we'll talk about it, kind of separating the two out a little bit. So, during ancient Osirian's zenith of power, Geb became a southernmost province. When the collapse of Osirian during the renowned 4 Pharaohs of Ascension, which I did in a Osirian episode where I at least talked about the modern country and mentioned the 4 Pharaohs, a period of turmoil kind of had the empire decline for centuries. During that time, the zealous ruler Kenaton emerged, bringing us some stability, purging the nation of its enemies, getting control of distant territories. Instead of fading into eternal exile during this time period, because he filled that role, Geb chose a different path. He basically came to the southernmost colony, subjugated it, bestowed his name on it, and turned it to reflect his necromantic nature, and this happened in -929 AR. So, yeah, we'll get into Geb a little bit more, but he was from Osirian, and basically, during some of the tumultuous times of Osirian history, he got into some shit and then just ended up going south and basically like, this is mine now. So, until the Archmage Nex came, Geb was a peaceful nation. Nex united the plains north of Geb under his leadership and cut Geb the country off from overland trade, the Golden Routes. In 892 AR, negative, so about 30 years after the form, this was -929 to -892. Basically, Geb and Net's mutual ambitions on each other's territory basically ignited a magic rivalry that is one of the most famous in Golarion's history and plunged them to wars that would last centuries. There was deadly exchanges of powerful spells. Geb sucked the life from most of the land surrounding the cities of neighboring Nex by by the use of wishes. In return, Nex bladed the lands of Geb in cataclysms that decimated the population. Geb responded by animating the casualties in the legions of walking undead. This began Geb's reliance on undead. Because again, the Necromancer Geb, the individual, had necromantic tendencies and things in the country, but it was basically this ancient and powerful war lasting hundreds and hundreds of years with his neighbor that relied on needing this undead then. Basically the population, which was just fine to be ruled over by a necromancer, is really becoming mostly more undead. After the number of vicious attacks by 576 AR. So we're talking now, the animosities began in negative 892. We're talking 576. So this is over 1,000 years later. Geb's forces advanced on Nex capital in Quantium, reached the walls and palace of Bandershar. Magical poisonous smoke decimated the city's population, and Nex vanished into the refuse of Next. Which is... It's a construction of his personal demiplane known as the Crux of Next. Basically disappeared, and just noting that the entrance to the refuge and lower levels of Bandersnatch Towers basically fled to there during the big battle, and Nex has disappeared, though the gates have supposedly opened in 4716, so there's rumors of his return. But again, it's been 7 years. No return yet. Unless there's going to be an adventure path based around that. Who knows? Maybe they'll do an adventure path based around the return of Nex and a battle with Geb. Sounds like a fun one. Sounds like one that could actually happen, honestly. They might be working on that one. So there was no trace of Nex, because he did run. Geb was convinced he was still alive, but was distraught that he didn't vanquish his own rival. You know, he'd been fighting this guy for like over 1,000 years. He wanted to get the victory, but the guy just disappears. He's like, I won, but I didn't win. The loyal household servants of Nex, known as the Archlords of Nex, had resilience in the face of relentless assaults aimed at imprisoning Nex indefinitely with Bandershar. Despite the various attempts, the Archlord thwarted the efforts to seal away their master, which basically, the idea was that Geb devastated the city, had kind of attacked, had hoped to basically, said, okay, I can't kill him. This way he escaped, let me seal it away so he can never return. So he never got that total victory. And after several decades of living in this resentment, this torment grew unbearable, and he killed himself in ritualistic ways in 632 AR. So Geb ended his own life in a ritualistic manner. But it didn't end the conflict. His rage, disappointment, and necromantic connections led him to return as a ghost. So he has a continued existence, that he's doomed to until he basically can ensure of his own rival's fate. So Geb basically was driven on by this rivalry, and when everything broke apart, this thing that had consumed his life for over 1,000 years basically drove him kind of mad, and in a ritual he just removed himself from existence to end the torment of he could not win, he never win, he could not have his victory. But he came back as a ghost. So now the ruler of the country is an immortal ghost, and much of the population, unfortunately, thanks to 1,000 years of war, plus is animated skeletons and zombies. So Geb quickly transformed to a land of undead and necromancy. In a unwavering display of devotion, thousands of the most zealous followers of Geb willingly sacrificed themselves, binding their undead souls to serve their ruler. And through an ultimate act of obedience, they pledged their eternal fealty to Geb, ensuring loyalty even on death and undying loyalty. So Geb, in this version of it, became a source of fear from its neighbors. Because, again, like, it had always been a necromantic-connected country, it had been very powerful, had necromancy at the heart of it, but now it really was a undead country. This evolution some 4,000 years ago. So, there's a lot of fear from neighbors, and so there was raids that came to attack the land and sea. One such one, with the most long-lasting implications, were carried about the Knights of Osman, who would become involved with the Shining Crusade. They basically sought to add their glory following the conclusion of the Shining Crusade and defeating the Whispering Tyrant. Their attack failed, and Geb was so incensed by people that so far away would launch an unprovoked attack. He basically animated 6 of the fallen knights as Grave Knights. And then he ordered the new undead minions to travel to the headquarters in Lastwall and steal the corpse of Arizani, basically the former herald of Erudin, the god, and the knight's patroness. So, yeah. Basically, Knights of Osman win the Shining Crusade, imprison the Whispering Time, but like, there's still more undead out there. At least you can beat up Geb. And so, like, again, 6 of the most powerful knights became Grave Knights. They stole the corpse of their, like, divine herald, and doing this, Geb took a year and a day to convince and drag Arzani's soul back from the great beyond. It's to resurrect in any way, to grab his soul back, you have to kind of convince them, trick them, something like that. And he managed to bring her back. And over the period of years, then, he corrupted her into a lich with pretty much none of her former personality. He made Arzani his trophy wife and forced her to rule the nation in his name. Because he didn't... Honestly, at this point in time, Geb didn't want to really rule a nation. Now, in 4719, Arzani escaped Geb's clutches, and Geb the Necromancer's clutches, and Geb has become convinced of Nex's imminent return, so he's returned to active rulership of his own kingdom. Basically, he still didn't know about... Like, Nex was no longer... He just didn't really care about what was going on. He didn't have anything, but he's like, oh, my ancient rival's coming back. Hey, everybody, let's get together. Let's go ready to beat him up. Yeah! You know, he's back in it. He's excited to return to all that kind of stuff because, you know... And, of course, his wife, who we'll talk about, too, because she has an interesting story to discuss, you know, escaped also. We'll talk about her, because she's gone divine. Arzani is a deity now, which, you know, we'll talk about that. She's had a hell of a life. We'll mention her a little bit. Anyway, let's talk about let's talk about the society of Nex, and we'll talk about the areas within. I mean, Geb. I think this actually is going to be there. We go. We'll use that one. So, most of the inhabitants of Gebs were humans of Osirian descent. Remember, this was the ancient Assyrian Empire had settled in this region. Again, countless numbers died in the war with Nex and became undead. And then Geb became a ghost. And undead became the most prominent thing in society. So the majority of Geb's inhabitants are undead. There are some living creatures that sometimes willingly accept transformation to undead as a mark of fidelity to the ruler. And the only living creatures with any significant influence over the affairs of the nation are Geb's most powerful necromancers. So there are some still living necromancers that do have a huge say in the way that Geb is ruled. Not that many. Most of the rulers are undead. We'll talk about that when we talk about the government. Basically, their ability to create control undead gives them influence over the functioning local society. And over the millennia that has existed, the thousands upon thousands of years, Geb is basically one of, if not the preeminent center for the study of necromancy. And if you need any kind of necromantic lore, in anywhere on the entire planet of Golarion, you will want to go to Geb to research it. It has the most comprehensive inputs of information. So there are 3 castes in Geb society. The Quick, which are the living, who are not thralls, though. That's an important note. The Dead, the Intelligent Undead, and the Chattel, which are living thralls bred as food and mindless undead. Later, Worm. So the Quick and Dead are treated equally, and the Chattel have no rights. Chattel are food or mindless undead. So that's the thing, is there's 2 sets of society. There is a living part, the Quick, and there is a dead part. And the Quick and the Dead's relationships are regulated by something called the Dead Laws, which basically ensure the rights and security of both groups are protected. And of course, though not everybody follows the law in the nation, so if you're a visitor, beware. Basically, the Dead Laws, to talk about them for a moment, regulate the relations between the living and dead of the country. So, it protects the right of both sections of society. Intelligent undead have as many rights as living creatures. It also regulates the owning of slaves, both living and undead, and some aspects of necromancy. Channeling positive energy within the nation's border is prohibited, so don't be a cleric of a good deity, basically. And those undead who require living creatures to feed upon have specially bred chattel under the Dead Laws for consumption, and consuming unsanctioned living people is prohibited. Some of Geb's debased lower nobility, as well as insatiable vampires, kind of sometimes hold themselves above the law and indulge in their cravings against anyone they find, risking legal consequences and permanent death. So if you visit the country, look out. Anyway, if you die in Gebite soil, you're reanimated as mindless undead to serve this state in eternal bondage unless otherwise stated. If you have sufficient clout or wealth, you can avoid this fate by transforming yourself into an intelligent undead creature. Through dark magics, letting yourself be killed by a ghoul or a vampire, or other creature who can create progeny. The act of doing this is seen as a great service to the state, though it does create a large population of lesser intelligent undead who see themselves as superior to their unintelligent undead, but don't really have true power in the state. And corporeal undead in Geb sometimes coat their flesh in the unguent of revocation to have an appearance of life. Let's talk about the various settlements and places of interest within Geb, before we move on to talk about the government and some of the other stuff, and of course, Geb himself. Which we will talk about good old Geb. You don't want to skip out on talk about him, and we will dive into Arizani too a little bit there. So, it's located in eastern Grund, known in the area of the Impossible Lands. To the west is the Shattered Range of the Mwangi Expanse. To the south is the Field of Maidens, which is a permanent tribute to Geb's sorcerer's power. We will talk about that. And the north is the Mana Wastes, which is the, I've talked about the Mana Wastes in Alkenstar in a previous video. Go check them out if you want to learn about that. But it's a scar from the war between Geb and Nex. And to the east is the Obari Ocean. So we'll talk about the various locations before we talk about the settlements. They have a major woodland with Axen Woods. It's found in the central part of the country. It did suffer badly in the war between Geb and Nex. The trees of this twisted forest are either dead or undead, so there's undead trees. There's a lot of strange creatures, ghost dryads, hate-filled wolves, twilight unicorns. They're very unique to the forest. Of course, the Arizani River, Copper River, both flow through there. Off the coast is the Crabfield Islands, called Itara by the Gurundi people locally. It's northeast of the capital, Mekatar. It's an isolated corner of the nation. Yeah. He lost his crew to the Black Crabs in Crabfield that serve a clip-off that in that area. The Field of Maidens is the one thing I should talk about all these. It's a huge plain dotted with statues of many female human warriors. Its history is very sinister. So in 4329, the Pirate Queen Marston Slash sent an army of warrior women in invasion to the undead kingdom of Geth. We'll talk about this a little bit too. They were driven north in the conflict in the Southland with Hollomog and sought to create a new home for themselves. So Geb, the Necromancer, turned the entire army to stone and created the Field of Maidens. Individual statues have occasionally been transported off the field and sold as macabre works of art all over the world. Occasionally a spirit of a dead warrior can somehow return and animate the stony corpse, transforming it into an undead creature known as a petrified maiden. If this occurs to a statue that's been removed from the Field of Maidens, it does whatever it can to return to the field. And a Medusa of mysterious origins, known as the Lonely Maiden, walks among the statues of the field. So that's a really pleasant thing. Yeah, there's the Fields of Jahad, the plains south of Garund, east of the Shattered Range, kind of the southern border in that entire area. The Jahad River, the Shattered Range themselves, which are technically in the Mwangi Expanse, next to Nex. And there you go. So, let's talk about some settlements. Some ones that we know the names of, but we don't know much information about, are Fort, Scourbone, Hollow Flesh, and Tilzar. Can't tell you a lot about them, I can tell you their names. Other ones are Avorsi, 50 miles south of Metakar. It's a estate granted to loyal servants of Gebite leaders. The mayor's been plotting against his own family for decades. Its population is human wizards and clerics of Ergatha, some Bodak, Morg, and Ghoul wizards. There's some mindless skeletons and zombies as field workers, and receives a human chattel from Corpseblood. Corpse Light, of course, is a farming community in northern, in north of the Axian Woods, 2 days east of Grey Dirge. It's not a traditional farming town. It raises intelligent humanoids for food and sustenance for the undead beings of Geb. They're kept in pens until they're shipped out. And they grow standard crops also to feed them too. So, yes. It's a pretty awful place, if you think about it. It's the people farming community. The nation. That's Corpse Light. Geb's Rest is sardonically called Bitter End by the locals. It's the northern border of Geb on the edge of the Spellscar Desert. It's pretty much a ruin. It's a supply road that connects Grey Dirge to the south through the Manadit Wastes all the way to Inachus and Nex. Grey Dirge, small city, it's in the southern foothills of the Shattered Range in north-central Geb. It's normal custom for Geb to reanimate the citizens as undead once they die. It's built out of the bones of Gebites who were unwilling or unable to reanimate. So, if you don't want to come back as an undead, maybe move into Grey Dirge. And you won't, and your bones will be just built into the city. You know, the people that live there have their own reasons to live in a city-sized ossuary. The Empty Threshold, a temple of the Zon Cathan, is one of the most notable features, and it is home to only one Bloodlord, who I'll talk about, Berlin Haldoi, which is the only other Bloodlord we know some things about, which we'll also talk about in a minute. It's surrounded by a 30-foot wall of fused stone and bone. It has 3 gates, east, south, and west. Districts are the Bloodlord's Grace, Burn Scrape, Court of Ghouls, Haldoy's Estate, Meat Market, and the Ovens. So, yeah. It's an interesting place, to say the least. There's a small town in decline, once full of bustling factors, Padked in Geb. There's also Shallow Shore, port town on the coast, directly east of Thornhearth. It appears to be sinking to the ocean, with half the buildings already sunk into the water. And the upper floors of the buildings that pop out are connected by soddy wooden bridges. And again, humans, Uruxi, ghouls, go about their lives, with only the conflict of normal life. So the Uruxian ghoul have underwater portions of town, and ghouls here are Lassadar, the aquatic versions. Thornhearth, as mentioned, a small village just south of the Axniar River. I think that's just mentioned. And there's also Yelid, which is in fact the largest city in all of Geb. Yelid. It's home to most of the undead armies, and that's why it's the largest. It's in the northeastern part of the country, borders near the Manawaste, less than 50 miles inland from the Umbari Ocean, surrounded by the Bone Wall, a curtain made entirely of bleached bones, which the local bone bloodlord can animate. It's home to an important necromantic colleges, as well as being the Mortuarium. Mortuarium is the most well-known of those schools. Which the school's central tower sticks up like a withered claw dominating the city's skyline. Below the structure in a drained aquifer, the Necromancers of Geb have bound or convinced a trio of nightshades to serve as a permanent well of necromantic enemy in the city of time of war. And the most powerful of these ones is known as the Bound Ones. And the school attracts Arcanists, who travel to Geb to join the ranks of the research known as Twilight Sages. So the army of undead comes there. Mekatar, we'll talk about that, the capital of Geb. It is the second largest city. Its architecture consists of Osirian-style pyramids, jet black in color, each home to one of the Bloodlords or influential local families. The largest is the Cenarium, which is the palace of Geb the Necromancer. Its harbor is the main outlet for the country's food exports. The largest temple serves Urgatha, and has both living and undead staff. Day-to-days are overseen by the Bloodlords, who we'll talk about, which is Geb's Undead Advisory Council. There are Necromancers, Grave Knights, Skeletons, Zulus, Zombies, and Ghasts from the Guards of Malkier and subordinates for them. And the presence of the Enforcers are potent enough to deter a lot. So most of the citizens of Malkiar and Geb, out of fear and revulsion, keep in line, basically. The blood-soaked regime of Geb is enough to keep people in order. And now that Geb has taken active control of the government again, as of 4 years ago, the streets of Malkin have been filled with frequent public undead processions honoring their reinvigorated leader. Geb has been depressed for, I don't know, what was the year that he kind of ghosted himself? For 4,000 years. He's back at it, man. He's got his groove back after 4,000 years. Ghost Geb is ready for action, and everybody's really pumped up about it. He's like, Ghost Leader, woo! Anyway. So, yeah. Let's show us here. Geb! Yes, Geb! I'm sorry, I put the hand in the wrong direction there. Let's talk about Geb, and then we'll talk about let's talk about the government of Geb, and then we'll talk about Geb. How's that sound? We'll start with the basics of the government, and then we'll circle back to Geb, and then we'll talk about a few other things and finish up today. So, Geb is the head of state. He's been a ghost for millennia at this point in time. He doesn't manifest in people very often, and he actually is bound by a curse that forces him to stay within the borders of the country. For a long time, he has Arzani rule in his stead. When she fled his control and he returned to more, she fled this control. And the thing is, that itself didn't return him to more active, control of the country. The, possibility of next coming back did. And so 4719, he now is back in charge. Agents of the Ghostly Sovereign operating in realms beyond tirelessly collect rare and arcane ingredients, prepare for Atlantic necromantic rites of immense scale. He's not the melancholic recluse he once was. He has this grand destiny in mind, readies himself and his eternal realm for a future of unparalleled significance. So something has woken him from his slumber in a way, and he certainly is more involved. Now, the mundane affairs of it are, of course, managed by, as I've mentioned, the Bloodlords. Who are the Bloodlords? They're an aristocracy of 60 powerful living and undead necromancer who are all trained by Geb himself. They used to all be mortals, but now most of them, overwhelmingly most of them, are undead. They're very powerful mummies, vampires, morgs, wraiths, shadows, and liches. The chief Bloodlord is a vampire, Kemnebi, who's the chancellor of the group. And he's, one of the two that we know stuff about. We do have a bunch of names of members that we've learned over the time period, but the actual, people, we only know, Burlani Hadoli, who's in charge of Grey Dirge, who is a halfling necromancer, and is actually alive. And of course, Kanabi, who's a powerful necromancer vampire. Bloodlords are basically in charge there. Going over a little bit more about the Bloodlords before we move on to some other things. Basically, originally, Arzani, the Lich Queen, was kind of the head of Sig. She handled a lot of stuff, and the Bloodlords would address her. Things were well in control. Once he disappeared, Geb came back. And the problem with this is it's a little different. When Arzani was basically the one they were going up to. Arzani's not Geb. She is the one going to Geb. So they want to kind of address her, get on her good side. But she's not Geb directly, and so therefore there's this kind of disconnect a little bit. Now Geb's in charge again. We'll talk about this in a second, but Bloodlords are back in charge of everything, completely and utterly, and, most of them are headquartered from the giant pyramid of Sonarum in Melkshar. They've pledged loyalty to Geb till death and beyond. And they have their own number of servants, other necromancers, grave knights, skeletons, zombies, ghouls, ghast, that work at the city guard, do things with them. They have various familiars, and they're this kind of... The Unified Council has tasked with all the matters of state and the nation's secretly police, who report directly to Geb. They're lawmakers. They create and adjust laws that govern both the living and dead. They act as judges, disputing disputes between mortals and intelligent undeads. They handle military matters, promoting the nation's well-being, maintaining numerous magic wards, looking into interests abroad. So if you're trying to look into interests with Geb as another nation, you talk to the Bloodlords. They also sign... they act as diplomats and sign treaties with their countries. Now, these 60 necromancers have authority over the citizens, demanding unwavering obedience. They aren't a unified ruling class. There's a lot of infighting, treachery, and that's just become basically the stuff of legends. And it's especially gotten really bad with Arzani going away. As I was talking about, when Arzani was there, a lot of the infighting, because it's trying to get the show their loyalty to Geb, get more favor. When you're going to Arzani, it's a step away. You're not trying as hard. Now that you're going to Geb directly, and he actually cares, well, yeah, it's become a thing. So there's schemes of assassination, political intrigue. They're desperately trying to prove their allegiance and their true loyalty. If you are a Bloodlord that you associated with Geb's former queen, you tend to be a target. because they want to basically eliminate rivals and solidify positions of power. Now, this isn't the only powerful groups within the city. The Bloodlords are a big one, but there's a lesser nobility. A lot of undead creatures, morgues, white shadows, and ghouls that put on airs and graces of aristocracy, but basically are kind of hated by the true aristocrats of Bloodlords. They're basically, you're copying us. Geb, for the most part, has not been interested in war, even with its rival Nyx. At most, they've been attacked by would-be heroes hoping to end the Undead Kingdom. So it's got this patient, subtle approach to international relations. The ruling class are mostly undead. They're immortal. They can be patient. They can strategize. They can take care of things that are very long-term. They have time on their side. So any kind of political schemes they come up with that deals with the internal politics of the Inner Sea region tend to be centuries long. And they've got some pretty big influence with clandestine maneuvers that are deeply behind the scenes, always for their own long-term ambitions. So, War with Nyx ended many millennia ago. They're not really friends, but they are bound together with some trade. So this is some things that have happened. And Geb, the nation, is good relations with Jarlamy, Kapatesh, Quadria. They don't really do a lot with Mwangi Expanse. The Shattered Range kind of blocks everything out. And the only enemy that they had really left over in the world was Lastwall, until the Whispering Tyrant destroyed them and made the Corpse Lands. And, they had never forgiven the theft of Arizani's corpse and animation of Arizani. So, let's talk about Geb. So, he did live a long time. He's a ghost. He's theoretically over level 20 and a necromancer. He was born in negative 1140 AR, died 632 AR. He was born in Sothis, to a noble family. It was 1108 AR. He politely asked the governor of Mekatar to make him king, that he laughed at, and then tore the governor's soul from his body and became the ruler of Geb. Basically, his family had rebelled against the pharaoh Kenaton. He'd served as a wizard of Mortuary Peace. His family was defeated. Burning his leaders, settling to exile. He fled to Melkatar and basically took over. The relationships with Nyx for Geb started very cordially. He's only another wizard in this age who could be considered a peer. And so the two actually started out relatively well. They visited others' nations, diplomatic relations were very peaceful, and they showed each other their power. It's just that their professional competition grew more vicious, and neither wanted to be second best. That's what led to the war. They actually really didn't hate each other. They just wanted to be best. Now, granted, it could evolve into hatred after a millennia of battling it out. But that's really what started it all. So, as I said, with Geb, the country's history, Geb the Necromancer died, became a ghost, offed himself and became a ghost, and spent 4 millennia, milling about, couldn't rest. He still thinks his rival survived. So the advent of Arizani basically changed a little bit of his directionlessness. So this is the start of the path which has led Geb, the Necromancer, to where he is now. He took interest in stuff that can challenge him, sort of like the Knights of Osmond's invasion, the stealing of Arizani and rising her as a Lich, which was around 3890. Of course, then 3229, the Field of Maidens was created, and he rained a cataclysm down upon their capital city then. Effectively, the thing is, when he saw an opportunity for something or someone to rival him, that's when he got excited. He got involved. He wanted to be involved with stuff, but nothing was next. And I think that kind of like he sinks back into despair after this. And the thing is, as soon as Arizani was his queen, and leaving her to rule, he actually became a lot more secluded for the next, hundreds of years, for the next, thousands of years, and rarely appeared. He disappeared for millennia. He'd been around, sort of, doing stuff for a while, but now, But now, Arizani's disappeared. The flesh forges of Nyx have begun to activate the mana wastes. There's signs that Nyx may return. But, again, Geb is still bound to where he is. And he does fail to remember that he basically, anything revolved around him and his ritualistic ending of his own existence and revival are not in his mind. He doesn't know, and he's actually not aware that he's imprisoned to his nature as a ghost. It's sort of like this weird thing of, he probably understands sort of what he is, but he doesn't know he's imprisoned, and he doesn't know how he became a ghost. He just doesn't remember that. He is a ghost. He evolved into that somehow. So, yeah. There have been some things in Geb that could be noted that are pretty big information related to recent history, which doesn't relate to their foreign relations. Returning to rulership, three of the cities, including the greatest necromancy school in Geb, had vanished. They were deduced that they were taken by the Haojin tapestry, so he sent ambassadors to Goka to demand a return or the aid of Haojin herself as compensation. Camilla Dranilich has been negotiating with Geb to rid Gault of the Final Blades. Geb is interested in them because he wants to turn them into weapons for his Grave Knight generals. Because it's also a great place to negotiate food for the Gaultian rabbles. Things there that are going on. And he's noticed the firearms and technology from Duggan Hold and Alkenstar. He's actually been seeking allowance with Anong Arakuk, the dwarven ruler of Duggan Hold, the Sky Citadel in the Mana Waste next to Alkenstar, which is also to remove a powerful ally from Nyx. The Nyx returns! So, there are these things going on and weird stuff that's happening along the way. And I'm not going to dive into Haojin and the Haojin Tapestry. That's another powerful spellcaster and artifact level thing. Just to note that. Haojin is the Ruby Phoenix. If you want to learn a little bit about more, I believe the Adventure Path, Fist of the Ruby Phoenix, the Ruby Phoenix Tournament. Fist of the Ruby Phoenix? Yeah, Fist of the Ruby Phoenix. Those three books kind of deal with a little bit of her. Haojin created the tapestry. It's a powerful artifact. It's a thing to talk about. So, again, these are things that are side things that we're not dealing with right now. We're mentioning them a little bit. Anyway, that's Geb. Now we have one final player in this and a little bit more to talk about. We'll talk about this with the include talking about page. Let's talk about Arizani the Undying. That's not her as a lich, that's more of her as a goddess. So she is the Red Queen, the Undying, the Harlot Queen formerly, the Lich Queen formerly, the Red Crusader formerly, Herald of Eredin formerly. She's a human lich. This was her as a being. She's a you have to look into the entire... Oh, that's a picture. There we go. Fixed it. So, some things to note about her. Just as a summary, we're not going to go into depths about her. She started as a Herald of God, abandoned evil necromancers, became the Lich ruler of Geb when Geb withdrew. The part of it that we have to know about for her history, she ruled Geb. She hoped that Eredin, an old friend of hers, would save her. Never did. And then he died. She realized that she was linked to Tar-Baphon, the Whispering Tyrant, when he killed her. And the hateful whisper her heard since her raising were not her own, but Tar-Baphon's. She heard the rage replaced with hope, that he'd be regaining his freedom. She escaped from her Grave Knight jailers, who basically kept her in place. Moved north. Watched the Radiant Fire destroy Lastwall. Basically saw this group of adventurers that were tied to it, aka the PCs of the Tyrants, adventure path that was involved with it, which was the... oh god. That was one of them. Tyrant's Grasp adventure path. So, yeah. Basically arranged some stuff and helped them out. She kind of disappeared then. But we also know she's kind of a deity. There's more. Check out Tyrant's Grasp if you want her full story. I think it's the best way to say it. She does have a weakness. Her internal organs were removed before her animation as a lich, and they're placed in special canonic jars known as Bloodstones of Arizani. She was concerned that these organs would be used against her. She tried to track them down and destroy them, including using the retinue of her former Knights of Ozen to search for them. Little success. The whole fraction of the former Azani's former divine power. Effectively, she had been a divine herald and kind of ascended to this goddess of the abused, dignity, and unwilling undeath. So that's her divine retinue. Just to keep an idea. Alright, and that's Arizani. And one last thing to talk about is Geb's in a really good climate. It's moisturous winds from the Bari Ocean. Great grasslands suited for agriculture. And there's a lot of fields worked by mindless undead. And foodstuffs from Geb are a major import, because it doesn't have a lot of living people there. Nyx, in return, has a lot of rare components and luxury goods, as well as Alkenstar, which has the city's ice wine, which is a favorite of Geb's nobility. And it does export its stuff throughout nations in the Inner Sea region. And as a mark of friendship, it makes an annual gift of corpses and slaves to the ghoul city of Nemret Nokoria in the Darklands beneath Osirian. So that's Darklands and the ghoul city. But that's an entirely different thing. We're going to talk about the Darklands in the future. That's a topic. But, yeah, I think that's all we can talk about for now for Geb, the Nation of Undead, which is a pretty dark place, I gotta admit. Like, there's a lot of terrible things that happen in the Golarion world. And the Golarion world is not ashamed of, or it doesn't try to shy away from some of the darkness that exists in the world. And their world, too. And I think this is a very good example of that. It's a nation where there are beings raised as cattle for undead. That's one of the things that's going on. And certainly it's not a... oh, I didn't put up this. No, I didn't put up this. Sorry. Distracted by something for a second. I was saying, they don't shy away from that darkness. And the thing is, you can see that the nation itself may not have ended up this way except for a series of events. Geb meeting Nyx, and the two of them forming the rivalry which defined both of their existences, basically drove the history of what would become both those nations, and especially Geb. For quite some time, Geb was just being fined by a city ruled by a necromancer. The war, the rivalry, the friendly turned unfriendly rivalry between two powerful spellcasters killed so many, created legions of undead, killed most of the population, devastated things, and led to what would become Geb today. The death and ghosting of their necromancer leader changed the course of them too. Geb's depression, insanity, whatever you want to call it, whatever reason he went down those paths, which unfortunately even he doesn't know that. What drove him to the ritual which ended his existence and brought him to undeath is unknown. And the fact is, it's assumed from the way things happened because he became a ghost, he didn't plan on coming back. Who knows what was planned for him? Maybe he wanted to become another kind of undead and the ritual failed. He doesn't remember. He doesn't know. There's so much he's missing, and his, weird or depression, not weird depression, that's kind of insulting. His depression and, listlessness for millennia basically means it might have gone from him, and it just let Geb evolve into what it became. And yes, it's a nation of undead. People try to get rid of it. It's one of those things that it's this catch-22 of plenty of nations trade with them for food, and there's some awful things that go on there, but they're supplying food supplies for probably a relatively good price, and better price than many other places, because they don't need it very much. They have a very small living population, mostly necromancers. Or other people that can control undead. What is Geb and its society and its existence is just a reflection on a dark and twisted history of a number of decisions and things that have happened that have led to what it is today. And what will become of Geb? Will next return? Will there be another great war? There's so many questions that may not be answered, and the fact is we don't know, because it's one of those things is, as much as we can say there's a lot of tumultuous things happening along with all the adventure paths, where I mentioned a couple of adventure paths with this powerful sorcerer and the Fist of the Ruby Phoenix and stuff like that, and Tyrant's Grasp. These are major events that are affecting things. These places don't need to have that story. They could, but they don't need to, because it's the ages and the length of undeath. As I said, the manipulations and influence of Geb is centuries in the making, and centuries for the future. The Bloodlords' machinations, all for the glory of their necromancer ghost lord Geb, are pretty heavy. And that's the thing, is there is an eternal loyalty deep within the hierarchy of very powerful necromancer undead in that nation. And that loyalty has not been tested and might never be. There will be... Geb has that loyalty. No matter what he does to his depression didn't change that. They just wanted to do something to help improve their boss's mood for a couple millennia. And now it's back. Hey, maybe next will show up and I can beat him up and I'll have a rival again. Anyway, I think that's my expression on what I think Geb really is. Both Gebs. And I hope you enjoyed learning about them and their honestly very dark country. And I'm assuming undead country is going to have those dark tones. It is a nation of undead. Not just for undead, but mostly for undead. And some living. As long as you're a necromancer, you're probably going to be fine. If not, you end up cattle. Or someone's victim. But anyway, that's it for today. I thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed learning about these things. We're continuing Spooktober, as I've been calling it, throughout the month with more spooky, kind of dark topics, or, horror-adjacent related topics. in various role-playing games, and we'll do more for Pathfinder as they come. If you want to check out more of my live streams of these up on Twitch, twitch.tv/Dracovin Empires. They are every Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays, early afternoon, usually between 1 or 2. Only canceled because of family emergencies or pushed back because of things going on. But of course, Saturdays around 11 o'clock, which I have to be a little bit more exact around in the morning. Pathfinder stuff's usually on Thursdays. White Wolf / World of Darkness. Well, World of Darkness stuff is usually on Saturdays. General stuff. These go up on YouTube, of course. And for support on both these channels, hey, if you want to give some support, that doesn't cost you any money. A follow on Twitch and over on YouTube /Dracovin Empire. A subscription there. Like, a comment. Have you been to Geb? Have you done Adventure Geb? Have you used Geb in any way? Good question. And always ring the bell if you want some extra information. Going to make sure to do the full bell thing and stuff. Because apparently, YouTube stuff. Stuff to help algorithms and, support the channel more. These are basic things you could do beyond anything else. So. Alright, social media, I can't forget that. I have a Discord at twitter.com, make sure to check those out. I usually just get schedule stuff and occasional brain farts of information. I'm usually more on Discord, but I show up on both here over the course of days. So, hey, and it's a great place to reach me. I think those are all the shoutouts I normally give for these things. Discussing tabletop on Saturdays in the afternoon if you want to see more tabletop stuff with discussions that are based around that. I do have some live plays. The current one ended as of this recording / streaming. I just had the Grant of the season finale of Buccaneers Shackle Sea. Make sure to check that out on YouTube. But I'll have more coming up in the series soon. And I do some gaming stuff. Spooky month for October, so some spooky or horror games and stuff like that. So if you want to see the gaming, that's usually Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Mondays. Okay. That's it. Hey, everybody out there. Have a great rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed learning about this and diving deeper into Golarion and the interest of the world. That is a world not ashamed of that there are places that have horrible things happen. There are plenty of great places in Golarion. And there's places like this. I've talked about plenty of nations that have both light and dark in them. Good and evil. And Geb's one of those nations that certainly points to the evil. Anyway, until the next time we chat, I bid all of you out there a deep and heartfelt and spooky farewell.